He loved her before he understood what love would cost him, before duty hardened his silence, before the world gave her other paths forward. He never spoke. He never claimed. And now, silence might cost him the one wolf fate chose long ago. The first time Sarah met Lucas, his knuckles were scraped and bleeding. He couldn't have been more than 8 summers, all sharp elbows and stubborn jaw, standing between her and 3 older boys who'd cornered her by the half-frozen creek at the edge of the pack lands. Snowmelt had turned the banks slick and treacherous, the water rushing past in a dull, angry roar. She had slipped once already, catching herself on a rock that bit her palms, and their taunts had climbed higher with each flailing step. "Go on, little rabbit," one of them had jeered, boot nudging closer to the edge. "If you're going to fall, do it properly." She hadn't cried. She remembered that clearly. Her throat had burned with humiliation, but no tears. Just the hard, locked feeling in her chest, the certainty that if she made a sound, it would only feed them. Then Lucas had appeared, barefoot, breath clouding the chill air, eyes a shade too intense for a boy his age. He hadn't shouted. He just moved, placing himself between her and the others with quiet, lethal resolve, as if he already understood what it meant to stand as a shield. "Leave her," he'd said, voice low, not yet grown into the deep command it would someday carry, but still edged with something that made the boy's bravado falter. "You heard my father. No more games near the river. You want to fall in? Do it alone." One of them snorted, anger wrestling with the knowledge of who Lucas was, the Alpha's son, the boy who would someday wear his father's mantle. "She shouldn't be here." "She's here now," Lucas answered, without looking back at her, "and you're not going to touch her again." When one of them lunged to shove him, Lucas didn't move aside. He took the hit, absorbed it, and drove his fist into the boy's ribs with a decisive, controlled motion that was not wild or childish. It was measured, intentional, protective. By the time the others bolted, grumbling threats they didn't have the spine to fulfill, Lucas's hand was scraped and bruised, and Sarah was still standing exactly where he'd found her, boots caked with mud, hair plastered to her cheek, pride barely holding her together. He turned then, dark hair falling into his eyes, breath still uneven. For a moment, he just looked at her, taking in the torn edge of her cloak, the red on her palms. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She stared at his knuckles instead. "Your hand." "It's nothing." He wiped it on his tunic and winced, which proved it wasn't nothing at all. "You shouldn't come this close to the river alone. It's worse now with the thaw." "I wasn't alone." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat, lifted her chin. "They were here." "That's what I mean," he said bluntly. "You weren't safe." He said it like it was a fact, not an insult or criticism, just the way the world worked. Sarah's father had always said the Alpha line had a different kind of wolf in their blood, older, fiercer, with an instinct to protect that could be as ruthless as it was loyal. She hadn't understood it until that moment. Lucas watched her with a focus that made her feel like the only thing in all the territory that mattered. "I can take care of myself," she managed, though it sounded defensive even to her own ears. His mouth tightened a fraction, not quite a smile, not quite disagreement. "Maybe," he allowed. "But you didn't have to, this time." He reached for her hand without asking, turning her palm up, inspecting the stone-marked skin. His touch was careful, almost too careful, as if he didn't trust himself to hold her without hurting her, as if some part of him already understood that his strength could crush as much as it could shield. "Come on!" His fingers wrapped around her smaller ones, warm despite the cold. "There's salve in the kitchens. My mother will fuss, but she won't make you feel stupid about it." "I don't feel stupid," Sarah said, though her cheeks said otherwise. He glanced sideways at her, the corner of his mouth tilting. "Good. Then you won't mind if I tell everyone I saved you from drowning." She stared at him in outrage. He let the pause stretch, then huffed a soft laugh. Fine, I'll say you were wrestling the river and winning, and I just got in the way. As they walked back toward the heart of the Packlands, his hand stayed around hers, roughened fingers firm, unyielding, as if releasing her before they reached safety would be a failure he refused to accept. She would be 20 before she realized that, for him, it had always been that simple. He stood between. That was who he was, and she had been his first line in the sand. Years blurred after that, but certain images never left her. Lucas, at 10, taking the blame for a broken training spear, so the quartermaster's penalty fell on him instead of Sarah's family. Lucas, at 12, sleeves rolled to his elbows, helping her carry baskets twice his weight from the smoking sheds because her younger brother had fallen ill and someone had to fill the gap. Lucas, at 14, standing rigid and silent as his father scolded him for skipping advanced strategy lessons, because he'd spent hours teaching Sarah how to throw a blade without dislocating her shoulder. She is not the only wolf in this pack, his father had snapped, voice like stone grinding on stone. Your duty is to all of them, not just one girl. Sarah had stood frozen behind the corner, pulse pounding in her ears. She expected Lucas to apologize, to bow his head, and promise to do better. That's what the alpha heir was supposed to do. Instead, his jaw flexed, and he said quietly but clearly, I know my duty. She's part of all of them. His father's hand had tightened on his shoulder for a moment, too hard, too proud, too frustrated. Then the alpha had released him and walked away, muttering something about stubbornness and misplaced priorities. Lucas came around the corner minutes later and found Sarah pretending she hadn't heard a thing. You shouldn't make him angry, she said, focusing on the knife in her hands. He's right. I'm not. Don't finish that sentence. Lucas's voice cut in, sharper than she was used to. You're not what? She fumbled for a safer word than the one lurking on her tongue. Important. I'm not someone you should be skipping lessons for. I'll decide that. There was no arrogance in it, just an iron certainty. He stepped closer, shadow falling over her hand. Again! Elbow in! You keep trying to throw like a human. I am human, she snapped, then caught the glint in his eyes. Mostly. He didn't smile. But there was the faintest easing of tension around his shoulders, as if simply standing close enough to correct her stance settled something restless inside him. Again, he repeated. She threw. The blade bit the practice trunk cleanly, right where he'd told her to aim. You're getting better, he said. She rolled her eyes. You say that every time. Maybe I mean it every time. His gaze held hers until her heartbeat did something strange and stuttering, a flutter in her chest that she refused to examine. You think I'd lie to you? No. She knew he wouldn't. Not about that. Everyone in the pack assumed they would drift apart as they grew older. He was the alpha's son. She was the oldest daughter of a family that had always served the keep. Hunters, cooks, guards, messengers, but never in the inner circle. Their paths might cross in training yards and gatherings, sure, but the distance between their futures would widen like a river in flood. For a time, it didn't feel that way at all. They shared stolen moments in quiet corridors, half-finished conversations at the edges of crowded feasts, wordless glances across the training field that said more than any whispered confidence. When Sarah was 16, and her wolf finally stirred fully awake beneath her skin, Lucas had been there, and it had happened just after dawn, the sky smeared with pale light, the forest still damp with the night's breath. She'd gone out alone, unable to sleep, drawn by a restless energy under her ribs that would not settle. Her senses had sharpened slowly over the past months, smells bleeding richer, sounds layering in complex detail. But that morning, everything felt different. The trees seemed to lean closer, listening. The wind carried wildness like a promise. She was standing in the small clearing where she and Lucas had once practiced with wooden blades when it hit her. Heat and awareness rushing through her in a single breathtaking wave. Her knees buckled, her vision blurred at the edges. The world tilted and then snapped into new focus. Her wolf rose inside her with a shuddering exhale, like a creature that had been sleeping for far too long. Sarah dropped to her hands and knees, fingers digging into the earth, heart racing with a fear that wasn't fear at all. It was exhilaration, sharp and intoxicating. Every scent in the clearing flared vivid and distinct. The moss, the damp bark, the faint metallic echo of old dried blood on a nearby stone. And under all of it, familiar as her own heartbeat, one scent cut through everything else. Pine and frost and something that was uniquely him. Lucas. Her head jerked up just as he broke through the tree line, chest heaving, hair damp with sweat as if he'd been running hard. His eyes went straight to her, widening as he took in the way she was braced on the ground, the trembling in her limbs. Sarah. Her name came out rough, threaded through with something she'd never heard from him before, not just concern, something older. Deeper. You shifted? Not yet. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, dragged through gravel and light. I think she's awake now. His gaze swept over her, checking for pain, struggling, anything that might require intervention. Does it hurt? No. She swallowed, trying to steady her breaths. It feels like I've been half asleep all my life, and now I'm finally not. Something in his expression fractured for a heartbeat, some carefully controlled line of composure. He took a step closer, then another. The air between them thickened, buzzing with awareness. Her wolf pressed against her ribs, pushing her forward, toward him. Sarah's fingers curled in the grass. She forced herself to stay still. How did you know? She asked, because she had to say something that wasn't what her instincts were urging. Go to him, breathe him in, close the last of the distance. I felt it, he said simply, in training, like a jolt. Then I realized you weren't there and... He exhaled, biting off the confession. I ran. Her wolf quieted at that, soothed by a truth it took in without words. Sarah looked away, unable to bear the intensity in his eyes. You didn't have to. I know. His voice had softened, lost some of its usual steel. I wanted to. Silence settled between them, filled with birdsong and the distant murmur of pack life beginning to stir closer to the keep. She felt his presence like a physical weight at her back, even before he extended his hand down to her. Come on, he said. Stand, slowly. She took his hand. Heat poured through her at the contact, her wolf flaring with a rush of recognition that made her breath catch. His grip was firm and steady, anchoring her as she rose. For a fleeting, dangerous second, she thought, this is what it would be like if... Her mind slammed shut on the thought, hard enough to make her head ache. She didn't have the luxury of dreaming beyond what they already were. Childhood friends, the alpha heir, and the girl whose family served his house. The gap there was real, regardless of how tightly his fingers wrapped around hers. He studied her face, brow creased. You're pale. I'm fine, she lied, ignoring the aftershocks still rippling through her. You always assume I'm about to crumble. You never do, he countered. That doesn't mean I stopped checking. His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, a small, unconscious motion. So small he might not even have realized he'd done it. Her wolf jolted as if touched by flame. She pulled in a breath and gently slid her fingers free. There was a flicker of something in his eyes when she broke the contact, swiftly buried, controlled. We need to tell the elders, he said, as though nothing had happened. They'll want to mark your first full shift. It's important. Important how? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. You're stronger now. His gaze drifted over her again, as if measuring the subtle differences. They need to account for that in training, in patrol rotations. His jaw tightened briefly. In the way others treat you. She thought of the boys by the river, their jeers, the way they'd circled like lesser predators around a wounded thing. Some of them will be idiots about it, she muttered. Lucas's expression cooled. Then they can answer to me. Her wolf liked that. A lot. The next months were a blur of change. Sarah trained harder than she ever had, muscles aching as she pushed past old limits, the new strength in her bones both a blessing and a challenge. She learned to track more quietly, to scent more accurately, to fight with the surety of someone who finally understood all the instincts that had been tugging at her for years. Through all of it, Lucas was there, not hovering, not smothering, but present, always in the periphery, always stepping forward when things tilted toward danger. If a sparring partner got too rough, he appeared with a calm, deadly suggestion that they match against him instead. If an elder made an offhand remark undermining her capability, Lucas's voice cut across the yard, a lazy but unmistakable rebuke cloaked in polite phrasing. He didn't call her delicate or fragile or in need of protection, but his wolf responded to every threat aimed her way with quiet, unrelenting vigilance. Has he always been like that with you? Her younger brother, Taryn, asked one afternoon, watching Lucas stalk away from a training yard altercation he'd ended with a few low words and a pointed look. Sarah studied Lucas's retreating figure, the powerful set of his shoulders, the coiled tension tamped down beneath his discipline. Yes, she said after a moment. More or less. Taryn raised a brow. You don't think that's strange? It's Lucas, she answered, as if that explained everything. To her it did. The day everything began to shift from simple childhood certainty to something sharper, more dangerous, started like any other. The pack was preparing for the moon gathering, a night when neighboring packs would arrive to renew alliances, bargain over territory disputes, and arrange the sort of matches that strengthened bloodlines and political bonds. The keep buzzed with activity. Cooks shouted orders in the kitchens. Young wolves ran messages back and forth. The long hall was swept, banners repaired, furs shaken out and draped in careful patterns that spoke of history and power. Sarah stood on a stool in her family's small house, near the outer wall, arms raised as her mother adjusted the laces of her only formal dress. The fabric had been mended 3 times over the years, but the deep green still suited her coloring, bringing out the warm undertones in her skin and the dark shine of her hair. You've grown, her mother muttered, tugging at a seam with a frown. Again. I'm going to have to let this out after tonight, if the cloth will even allow it. Sarah huffed a laugh. Blame the training, not me. I do blame the training. But there was pride threaded through the complaint. You're strong. Your grandmother would have approved. There was a knock at the door. Taryn, who'd been sprawled on a bench pretending not to eavesdrop, jumped to his feet. I'll get it. Sarah smoothed the front of her dress, suddenly hyper-aware of every crease, every loose strand of hair. It was probably one of the neighbors, dropping off extra herbs or asking about seating arrangements. Nothing that required her to... The door opened. Taryn's tone shifted. Oh, it's you. Her stomach did a strange little turn. Lucas's voice followed, low and familiar. Is she ready? Sarah rolled her eyes at the phrasing even as her pulse picked up. I'm not a winter roast coming out of the oven, she called, stepping down from the stool. Her mother's hand shot out to still her. Wait, let me see. She turned reluctantly, standing straight under her mother's critical gaze. You look lovely, her mother said softly, fingers briefly brushing the pendant at Sarah's throat. A simple piece of carved bone on a leather cord, nothing like the jeweled necklaces that would be worn by those in the Alpha's inner circle. Remember who you are tonight. That's all that matters. Sarah nodded, throat tight, and stepped into the narrow entryway. Lucas filled the small space with his presence, dressed in dark formal leathers that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the lean strength of his frame. His hair had been tied back at the nape of his neck, and there was a new band of leather around his upper arm, embossed with the Alpha crest, the mark of an heir stepping closer to full authority. For a moment, He said nothing at all. His gaze moved from her boots to her hem, up the line of her dress, lingering briefly on the curve of her collarbone where it met the edge of the neckline. His wolf's attention was a tangible thing, coiling through the space between them. Sarah fought the urge to fidget. "You're staring," she said, because if she didn't say something, she might forget how to breathe. He blinked once, slow, as if dragging himself out of some private storm. "I'm looking," he corrected quietly. "There's a difference." Taryn made a gagging sound. "I'm going to be sick." Lucas glanced at him. "You'll live." Her mother coughed, hiding what might have been a smile. "You'll be late if you keep standing in my doorway. Go, both of you. And try not to offend any visiting alphas before the moon is even high." "Yes, ma'am," Lucas said, with a sudden boyish grin that softened the hard lines of his face. He stepped aside to let Sarah pass, his hand hovering at the small of her back, but not quite touching, as if even that slight contact would be too much in the crowded path that led to the keep. Still, she could feel the heat of him at that distance, awareness flaring along her skin. Outside, the air was sharp with the promise of snow, the sky a deepening blue streaked with the first hints of starlight. Torches had already been lit along the path to the hall, their flames biting at the encroaching dark. They walked in silence for several strides, the noise of the gathering swelling ahead. Voices, laughter, the low hum of something electric in the air as wolves from other territories arrived, bringing their own scents and tensions. Sarah inhaled, picking them apart. Pine and smoke, strange spices, and under it all, steady as a drumbeat, Lucas's scent at her side. "You're nervous," he said, not a question. "Everyone's nervous," she replied. "It's a moon gathering." He tilted his head, studying her profile. "You don't usually care what they think." "It's not about what they think," she said, fingers tightening around the pendant at her throat. "It's about what they can change." He understood immediately. Of course he did. Matches, alliances, promises given in exchange for peace or advantage. Tonight, bonds would be suggested, nudged, sometimes pressured into existence, all under the guise of tradition and the moon's blessing. His jaw clenched. "No one can promise you without your consent." She arched a brow. "Is that law or opinion?" "It's both," he said, voice dangerously soft. "And if anyone forgets that, I'll remind them." She believed him. She always had. But belief didn't erase reality, the way some families measured worth in what their daughters could secure, the way certain alphas viewed human lives as chess pieces meant to be moved for the greater good of the pack. "I can fight my own battles, Lucas," she said, not rebuking, just reminding. "You don't have to snarl at everyone who looks in my direction." They reached the wide steps of the hall. Light poured from the open doors, warm and golden, spilling across the packed earth. He stopped just short of the threshold, turning to face her fully. The din of voices washed around them, muffled by the strange, suspended quiet that seemed to form whenever they stood too close. "I know you can," he said. "That's not why I stand between." "Then why?" The words slipped out before she could bite them back. His eyes darkened, wolf close to the surface. For a heartbeat, she thought he might say something that would crack everything between them wide open. "Because you're mine. Because I've loved you since a river almost took you, and I swore nothing else ever would." His fingers flexed at his sides. She saw it, the restraint, the war between instinct and control. "Because I want to," he said instead. "That's all." It felt like a lie and a truth all at once. Before she could respond, someone called his name from inside, voice ringing with expectation. The sound of it reminded her, with cold clarity, of who he was tonight. Not just Lucas, the alpha heir, future leader, the one everyone would be watching. "You should go," she said quietly. "Your father will want you at his side." A muscle ticked in his cheek. "You'll sit near the front?" "Lucas." She forced a small smile. I'm not part of the inner ring. You know that. His gaze flicked toward the hall, then back to her. Some invisible calculation passed through him. Stay where you can see me, he said, as if he had any right to make demands about her place. If anyone presses you, tell them you speak with me first. With you? She lifted a brow. You'll be surrounded all night. I'll hear you, he answered, and there was something in his tone that made her wolf settle, just a little. I always do. Then he turned and walked into the hall, shoulders squared, expression slipping into that measured, impassive calm she recognized as his armor. Sarah lingered on the steps for a moment, watching him join his father near the dais, watching the way the other alpha's eyes noted his presence, his bearing, his potential as future ally or rival. She had always known he would belong to the pack before he belonged to anything or anyone else. What she didn't know, not yet, was just how far that duty would force him to push down everything he never said aloud. Tonight, in the glow of torchlight and tradition, as unfamiliar wolves began to glance her way with speculative interest, she felt something shift inside her. Not her wolf, not fear, just the first faint tremor of a question that would haunt the years to come. Where in all of this, duty, expectation, alliances, was there room for the boy who had always stood between her and the edge? And what would happen to them when the world finally demanded a price for his silence? The moon gathering changed things, not all at once, not in a way that could be pointed to and named, but subtly, like a shift in wind that only became obvious once the chill had already set in. Sarah felt it first in the spaces between moments. Lucas was still there, always present, always aware, but the ease of him was gone. Where he had once leaned against door frames and traded half-smiles with her, he now stood straighter, spoke less, listened more. His attention fractured outward, pulled by voices that carried the weight of obligation rather than familiarity. Alpha voices, council voices, the kind that didn't care about childhood memories or half-finished conversations by the training ring. She noticed the change the morning after the gathering when she met him in the lower yard at first light. The frost was thick on the ground, crunching beneath her boots as she crossed the open space. Lucas was already there, moving through drills with disciplined precision, bare forearms gleaming faintly with sweat despite the cold. The leather band bearing his future crest was back on his arm, never far from him now. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, stopping a few paces away. He glanced up, expression smoothing instantly into something neutral but attentive. Enough. She didn't comment on the evasion. She rarely did. "You missed the dawn meal." "I had council matters." That was new language. She watched him complete another strike, the wooden practice weapon cracking against its target with controlled force. His movements were sharper than usual, efficient, restrained, as if he were bleeding off something he refused to let show. "You didn't even say goodbye last night," she said lightly, not accusing, just true. For a fraction of a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or frustration, at the world, at the timing, at himself. "I was called away," he said. "It couldn't wait." Her wolf stirred, uneasy. "Does it ever?" Lucas set the weapon aside and turned fully toward her then, gaze intent enough that it rooted her in place. For a heartbeat, the space between them felt charged, the old familiarity pressing up against the new distance like a memory refusing to fade. "Sarah," he said quietly. Her name always sounded different on his tongue, grounded, claimed in a way that made her pulse trip. "Things are changing." She folded her arms loosely. "I know. I need you to understand." "I do," she said before he could finish. "You don't have to explain what everyone already sees." That stopped him. His jaw tightened slightly. "Do you?" "Yes." She met his gaze, steady. "You're stepping into a role that was always going to be bigger than us, bigger than me." He didn't deny it. "I won't pretend I like it," she continued, voice calm but honest, "but I won't stand in your way either." Something in her answer seemed to unsettle him more than resistance would have. "That's not what I want," he said. "And yet," she replied gently, "it's what's happening." For a moment, neither of them moved. Frost clung to the edges of his hair. The morning light caught in his eyes, turning them almost silver. "I don't want you pushed aside," he said finally, voice low. "I just can't give you what you're used to, not right now." Sarah nodded once. She didn't miss the care in his words, or the restraint wound tightly around them. "I'll adjust," she said. "I always do." Lucas studied her as if committing the shape of her composure to memory, as if he already knew he'd regret asking her to be strong one more time. The pack adjusted quickly. Lucas's days filled with patrol briefings, border disputes, training oversight, and long hours with elders who measured his worth not by heart or loyalty, but by decisiveness. He learned to speak less and listen more, to weigh every word as though it might one day be used against him, or worse, against those under his protection, against Sarah. She noticed how often his gaze found her in crowded spaces now, not lingering, not soft, but vigilant. As if she were something rare and volatile he refused to leave unguarded. Others noticed too. Whispers followed her through the corridors. The alpha heir favors her. She trained with him since childhood, too familiar, dangerous, that kind of closeness. Sarah heard them all. She didn't flinch. She simply gave Lucas more space, not out of resentment, but awareness. She trained elsewhere now, paired with wolves who were stronger, faster, determined to prove themselves worthy in the new political climate. She volunteered for longer patrols, took on responsibilities that kept her useful without needing his presence. She did not chase him. Lucas noticed that too. The night he finally addressed it, the hall was nearly empty, the last embers of the fire burning low. Sarah was packing away training blades when his shadow fell across the table. "You don't wait for me anymore," he said quietly. She didn't look up. "I didn't realize I was supposed to." His hands curled at his sides. "You used to." "I used to have the freedom to," she replied evenly. "Now you don't, and I won't pretend otherwise." He stepped closer, too close. Her wolf pressed forward at once, recognizing him as it always had. She had to consciously steady her breathing. "You don't make this easy," he murmured. Her lips curved faintly. "I never have." Lucas exhaled, slow and frustrated. "You think I don't feel the distance?" "I think," she said carefully, finally meeting his eyes, "that you put it there on purpose." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. "Yes," he admitted at last. The word landed heavy, not cruel, just honest. "Why?" she asked. "Because if I let myself lean toward you, I'll never stop. Because the pack will see it. Because they'll use you to reach me." He gave her none of that. "Because attachment is weakness," he said instead, voice flat. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once. "Then you're doing what you think you must," she said. "So am I." He caught her wrist as she turned to leave, just briefly, just enough to stop her. The contact sent a jolt straight through both of them. Lucas released her instantly, as if burned. "Be careful," he said. She looked at his hand, then back at his face. "I always am." But as she walked away, her wolf curled inward, unsettled. And Lucas stood alone in the quiet hall, realizing far too late that silence, once chosen, was not something he could control forever. Because other wolves were watching her now, not with his protectiveness, but with interest. And the pack was already beginning to wonder where Sarah belonged, if not at his side, then somewhere else entirely. The first time the elders mentioned a bond, Sarah laughed. It happened in the north corridor, where the stone held the chill of night long after sunrise. She had just returned from patrol, boots scuffed, hair wind-tangled, muscles pleasantly sore in the way that came from work done well. Elder Marek walked beside her, his stride unhurried, his voice carrying the deliberate calm of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "You've been consistent," he said. "Reliable. The border patrols speak highly of you." She dipped her head in acknowledgement. Praise from elders was rare and never without purpose. "There's been talk," Marek continued, eyes forward, "about your future." She snorted softly. "That doesn't sound ominous at all." He regarded her sidelong. "You're of age. Your wolf is awake. You've proven yourself steady in temperament and skill. These are things the pack considers." "So I've become a thing," she murmured. A corner of his mouth twitched. "You've always been more than that. But yes, this is the way of it." They stopped at the junction that split toward the council chamber and the training yards. Sarah leaned a shoulder against the wall, rolling tension from her neck. "And what," she asked carefully, "does the pack think it has decided?" "That you should not stand unanchored much longer." Marek's tone held no judgment, just fact. "Stability matters, especially now. Now, when leadership was transitioning. Now, when alliances needed reinforcing. Now, when Lucas was being watched more closely than ever." Sarah understood all of that. "What if I don't want to be anchored?" she asked. Marek studied her for a long moment. "Want is only part of the equation." She smiled then, not with humor, but with composure. "And who does the pack believe suitable for this consideration?" "A wolf from the eastern ridge," he replied. "Calm, loyal. His line has never conflicted with ours. Neutral, safe, politically sound." "Does he want this?" she asked. "He's been told to observe, not pursue. Nothing is decided." Sarah closed her eyes for a brief second. Her wolf stirred, not with interest, not with curiosity, but with discomfort. A low, wary unease, like standing too close to a storm that hadn't yet broken. "I'll think about it," she said. Marek inclined his head. "That's all we ask." When he left, she remained where she was, the cool stone pressing through her clothes, grounding her. She did not think of the other wolf. She thought of Lucas. Not the boy by the river, not the man who watched her from across crowded halls. The distance, the silence, the way his restraint had hardened into something impenetrable. If he wanted me, she thought, I would know. Her wolf pressed faintly against her ribs, uneasy, but not demanding. "I know," Sarah whispered. "So do you." She didn't tell Lucas, not at first, not because she was hiding anything, but because the thought of bringing it to him felt like crossing a line he'd already drawn in stone. He had chosen silence. She would not shatter it just to ease her own uncertainty. Days passed, then weeks. The other wolf, Edrin, kept his distance, just as the elders instructed. Their interactions were polite, brief, and entirely devoid of tension. There were no lingering looks, no soft words, no accidental brushes of hands. Sarah felt nothing for him. Her wolf felt closed. But the pack noticed. Lucas noticed too. He saw how the elders watched her, how conversations paused when she entered rooms, how her name began to surface in quiet council murmurs he wasn't meant to overhear. One evening, he found her by the outer wall, staring out over the darkening tree line. "You're being assessed," he said without preamble. She didn't turn. "You make it sound like I'm a weapon." "Everything is a weapon if it shifts balance," he replied. She finally faced him, arms folded loosely. "Then you should be glad. I'm stable, unremarkable, easy to place." His jaw tightened. "Don't reduce yourself." "I'm not," she said evenly. "I'm seeing clearly." The words landed harder than she intended. "Is this about—" He stopped himself, pride and restraint tangling. "Is this about you wanting a bond?" She studied him then, really studied him. The lines etched deeper by responsibility, the vigilance that never eased, The way his eyes never softened anymore, even with her. "No," she said honestly. "This is about me understanding there will never be one with you." The truth sat between them like a blade laid carefully on a table. Lucas looked as if the ground had shifted beneath him. "You don't know that," he said. "I do," she replied quietly. "Because if there were even a question in your mind, you wouldn't have let it get this far." He inhaled sharply, then exhaled, measured. "You think I haven't wanted to stop it?" "I think," she said, voice steady despite the ache beneath it, "that wanting isn't the same as choosing." Her wolf pressed forward then, not toward him, but in sorrow, in recognition of something being mourned. "I won't be reckless," she added. "I won't bond without certainty, but I won't hold my life open forever either." Lucas's hands curled at his sides. "Sarah," he said, her name rough, as if pulled from somewhere deep. "Don't do this because you think I don't care." "Then tell me I'm wrong," she said simply. The moment stretched. This was it, the edge of the precipice. And Lucas, who had faced war councils and border threats without flinching, stood silent. That silence was his answer. Sarah nodded once. "All right." She turned away before he could reach for her. Behind her, Lucas felt something ancient and violent stir inside his chest. Not jealousy, not anger, but the creeping certainty that his restraint had crossed the line from protection into loss. Because for the first time, Sarah was not waiting, and fate, patient only for so long, had begun to move without him. The storm didn't come from the sky. It came from the council chamber. Sarah stood near the back wall, hands clasped behind her spine as Elder Merrick addressed the room. Lucas stood at the front beside his father, posture unyielding, eyes unreadable. The chamber was crowded, alphas, elders, captains, senior wolves. The air hummed with tension, thick with sense of unease and expectation. The topic of the gathering was clear even before Marek spoke. "Bonding offers strengthen the spine of the pack," he said, voice carrying easily through the stone hall. "And in uncertain times, anchors must be chosen wisely." Her wolf shifted restlessly. Lucas didn't look at her. Not once. Marek continued, "We have observed a potential pairing, politically stable, temperamentally compatible, strategically sound. Sarah of the Western Quarter." Lucas moved. Not a flinch, not a breath. A movement, sharp and immediate, like a blade pulled free of its sheath. His father shot him a warning glance. Lucas ignored it. "Edrin," Marek went on, "has expressed—" "No," Lucas said. The word cracked through the room like a chain snapping. Every head turned. Marek frowned. "This is a council matter, Lucas." "And I'm answering," Lucas replied, voice steady, deadly calm. "No." The alpha stepped forward, authority simmering beneath the surface. "Explain yourself." Lucas didn't look at his father. He looked at Sarah. For the first time in weeks, truly looked at her. Not cautiously, not from a distance, not as the heir. As the man who had once taken a blow, meant for her, and never stopped doing so, in one form or another. Sarah's breath caught in her chest. "Sarah is not available for bonding discussions," Lucas said. A murmur rippled around the chamber. Marek's brows rose. "By whose decree?" Lucas's jaw flexed. "Mine." His father's voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You do not speak claims without standing." Lucas didn't blink. "Then I'll make it clear." He stepped forward, one measured stride, closing the space between himself and the elder's table. "My wolf chose years ago," he said. Sarah's knees softened. Edrin, standing near the side wall, straightened in surprise but didn't argue. He knew, perhaps better than anyone else in the room, that feelings often preceded declarations. Marek studied Lucas with sharp, assessing eyes. "You've said nothing. You've shown nothing." "Because she deserved safety," Lucas said, voice quiet but razor-edged. "Not scrutiny, not leverage, not the consequences of my name. His father's expression tightened, but not with anger, with realization. Lucas continued, each word carved from the marrow of restraint. I protected her by distance. I protected her by silence. I protected her when it cost her understanding and cost me every breath I didn't take at her side. Sarah's wolf surged, a fierce ache blooming beneath her ribs. And now? Merrick asked. Lucas turned fully toward her. It felt like the world held its breath. Now his voice softened. Not weak, gentle the way storms are gentle before they break. Now, he said, I protect her by truth. The chamber faded. The murmurs dissolved. There was only him. Sarah, he said, her name rough with withheld years. I tried to give you freedom. I tried to keep you from the weight of what I felt, but I can't step aside while the pack rearranges your life because I've been a coward with my own. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Lucas took one more step, a boundary crossed with absolute intention. My silence ends here, he said. It wasn't a declaration. It was a vow breaking open into the air. If he had reached for her in that moment, she would have gone to him without hesitation. But Lucas didn't move again. He held himself still, shoulders rigid, jaw tight, giving her space to breathe, to absorb, to decide. Say something, he murmured. Sarah stepped forward before her mind caught up to her body. Every instinct she had, wolf and woman, aligned in a single direction. Toward him. She stopped only when the heat of him brushed her skin. You chose me, she said softly. His eyes darkened. I never stopped, and you hid it. Yes. And now you stand in front of the entire pack and claim what you wouldn't even admit to me? Lucas exhaled slowly. Because losing you is the only thing I fear. The chamber was silent. Sarah's wolf pressed forward, not in confusion, not in conflict, but in recognition. She lifted her chin. Then what is it you want from me? His voice lowered, barely more than breath. Everything. A shiver ran through her, not fear, not uncertainty, but the long-awaited alignment of a truth buried for too long. Then you should have asked. Lucas swallowed hard. I'm asking now. She held his gaze for a long, suspended moment. Good, she whispered, because I'm done stepping back. The smallest shift crossed Lucas's face, relief, staggering and fierce, barely contained by the armor of his control. The elders watched silently, recognizing that something ancient had just been invoked, something more binding than politics. Lucas's father finally spoke, voice tempered with inevitability. The pack will accept this, he said, if she does. Sarah didn't hesitate. I do. Lucas's breath left him, quiet, sharp, reverent, not a kiss, not a touch. Just two wolves standing so close, the air between them trembled. And in the quiet that followed, the entire pack understood that fate had not been altered, but finally acknowledged. The hall emptied slowly. Not because anyone had been dismissed, but because no one wished to intrude on what had just settled into place. Wolves drifted away in respectful silence, conversations muted, instincts keen enough to recognize a claim that needed no ceremony. Sarah and Lucas remained where they were, standing in the aftermath of truth. Only when the doors closed and the echoes finally faded did the tension in Lucas's posture break. Not visibly, not in any way that would read as weakness, but she felt it, a subtle easing, as though he were no longer bracing for impact. You should be angry, he said quietly. Sarah exhaled, slow and steady. I was, for a long time. He nodded once, accepting it without argument. I thought if I endured it quietly, it wouldn't touch you. She stepped closer. This time, he didn't retreat. But it did, she said. Not because you didn't care, because you cared so much you decided for both of us. His jaw tightened. I won't do that again. I know. She searched his face, the familiar contours now layered with something new, relief, awe, and a lingering edge of fear he hadn't yet shaken. You didn't trust yourself to want me without taking everything else with it. He closed his eyes briefly. I still don't. Her hand lifted of its own accord, not to his chest, not to his face. She placed it over his forearm instead, where muscle coiled beneath her palm, where restraint had lived for years. Lucas stilled instantly. The contact was simple, unassuming. It shattered him. His breath caught, not sharply but deeply, like someone finally breathing after years underwater. His wolf pressed forward, not in dominance, not in hunger, but in something reverent and steady. Sarah felt it meet her own. No blaze, no rush, just alignment. This, she said softly, fingers resting where his pulse beat strong and honest, is enough. His voice came low. You could have asked me at any time. I didn't want obligation, she replied. I wanted choice. You always had it. She shook her head slightly. Not until you stood where you are now. He turned his arm, slowly, deliberately, so her palm rested against his skin rather than his sleeve. His thumb brushed once over her wrist, testing, questioning. She didn't pull away. That was permission. Lucas lowered his forehead to hers, not quite touching. Their breaths mingled, warmth shared in the narrow space between them. I loved you before I had language for it, he said, before I understood what it would cost. Her eyes closed. I wondered, she admitted. Sometimes. But wondering isn't the same as knowing. He smiled then, not wide, not easy, but real. You know now. Yes, she whispered. I do. And I love you. Outside, the moon climbed higher, pale and watchful. When Lucas finally kissed her, it wasn't urgent. It was slow, intentional. His lips brushed hers like a promise being tested, then returned, firmer this time, deeper, not claiming, not consuming, just there. Present. Certain. Her hands rose to his chest, feeling the steady strength beneath her fingertips, the restraint that remained, not because he feared himself, but because he honored her. They parted only when breathing required it. He rested his brow against hers again, grounding himself. Stay with me tonight. Not an order, not an expectation, a choice. She smiled against his mouth. I already am. Later they stood on the ramparts, shoulder to shoulder, the wind tugging at their clothes, the territory stretching wide and known beneath the moonlight. This was never sudden, she said quietly. No, Lucas agreed. It was patient. Her wolf leaned into his. So was I. His arm came around her, not enclosing, not confining, just there, solid and unmistakable. And for the first time since childhood, Lucas did not stand between Sarah and the world. He stood with her, exactly where he had always belonged.